It was 6:45 in the morning when red and blue lights flooded my gravel driveway like I was some kind of criminal. I stood there in my work boots, steam rising from my coffee, completely stunned as an officer told me I was being detained for trespassing on HOA common property. I honestly thought he had the wrong address. Then I saw her, standing just beyond the fence, phone held high, lips curled into a satisfied little smile like she was filming a victory lap. Karen Whitlock, a woman I barely knew, but who clearly felt very important. She liked to call herself the board leader of the Silver Pines HOA. Here's what she didn't know yet. I wasn't part of her OA. Not even close. I bought my land in Red Hollow County for one very specific reason. It was outside any homeowners association. No rules, no fines, no busybodies. And most importantly, I legally owned the exact land she was accusing me of trespassing on. Every inch of it. That morning kicked off months of harassment, fake violation letters, false police reports, and nonstop intimidation from a woman who thought confidence could replace legality. By the time it was all over, Karen and her HOA learned a brutal lesson about property lines, real authority, and what happens when you try to bully the wrong homeowner. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I need to rewind a little to explain how a normal morning on my own land somehow turned into police lights and handcuffs. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm a licensed electrician in my early 40s, divorced and unfortunately very experienced when it comes to paperwork, permits, and legal nonsense. My divorce taught me a hard lesson early on: emotions lose, documentation wins. That lesson stuck. And after years of dealing with petty rules and power, hungry neighbors in my old neighborhood, I made myself one promise when everything was finally over. I would never live under an HOA again. Not ever. That promise is exactly why I bought my place in Red Hollow County. A small farmhouse on 2 acres of land, just outside the edge of a newer subdivision called Silver Pines. My property had been there long before that development ever existed. Parcel number, different zoning, different rules. When I signed the papers, I triple-checked everything. No HOA, no shared roads, no common land agreements, just mine. The house wasn't fancy. The kitchen was outdated, the fence leaned a little, and the gravel driveway could use fresh stone. But it was quiet, peaceful. The kind of place where you can breathe without worrying about someone measuring your grass. For the first few weeks, that's exactly what it was. I worked during the day, fixed things up on the weekends, and kept to myself. Then one afternoon, I heard tires crunching slowly on the gravel. I looked up and saw a white SUV rolling toward my driveway, HOA decals plastered on the doors like badges. A woman stepped out wearing sunglasses, clipboard tucked under her arm, confidence dripping from every step. She didn't ask if she could come onto my property. She didn't introduce herself politely. She just walked up like she belonged there. She told me her name was Karen Whitlock and said she was the board leader of Silver Pines. Not hello. Not nice to meet you. Straight into business. She started pointing things out immediately. My gravel driveway, my work truck, the shed I was in the middle of repairing. She said things like, "That won't fly here," and "We have standards." I let her finish, then calmly told her she had the wrong address. I explained that my property wasn't part of Silver Pines and never had been. I even gestured toward the fence line and said the boundary was clear on the county map. She laughed. Not awkward laughter. Not nervous laughter. A confident, dismissive laugh like I'd just told a joke. Then she looked me dead in the eye and said, "We'll see about that." I should have trusted my gut right then. A few days later, the first letter showed up in my mailbox. It wasn't from the county. It wasn't from any official office. It was from the Silver Pines Homeowners Association. The letter accused me of violating community standards and demanded that I repaint structures, remove vehicles from view, and bring the property into compliance. Within 72 hours, there was no official seal, no legal citation, just Karen's name signed at the bottom. I double-checked the return address. It wasn't even a real office, just a mailbox rental across town. At first, I thought it was a mistake, or maybe intimidation. Either way, I ignored it. Then another letter arrived, and another, each one more aggressive than the last. Threats of fines, threats of enforcement, language designed to scare someone who didn't know better. What really bothered me wasn't just the letters. It was the behavior. Karen started driving by slowly. Sometimes she'd stop near the fence and take photos with her phone. Other times, she'd stand there with her arms crossed, staring at my property like she was daring me to challenge her. I tried being reasonable. I sent a short, polite response stating again that my property was not part of Silver Pines and asking them to stop contacting me. I included the parcel number. I included a copy of my deed. That's when things escalated. Instead of backing off, Karen doubled down. She started telling neighbors that I was trespassing on HOA land. She claimed my driveway crossed into their property. She said I was refusing to comply and being hostile. None of it was true. But she said it with so much confidence that people started believing her. That's how I learned something important about people like Karen. They don't need facts. They just need momentum. And once they get it, they don't stop on their own. By the time I realized this wasn't just a nosy neighbor, but a full-blown harassment campaign, it was already moving fast. Letters were piling up. Tension was rising. And I had no idea yet that police reports were about to enter the picture. At that point, ignoring it was no longer an option. Karen did not take being ignored well. Once she realized the letters weren't scaring me into submission, she switched tactics. One morning I pulled into my driveway and saw her standing there with a measuring tape, heels sinking into the gravel, acting like she was conducting some kind of official inspection. She told me my access road crossed HOA buffer land and that I was encroaching. I reminded her, again, that I wasn't in her HOA. She didn't even respond. Instead, she started hammering bright orange flags into the ground, lining up what she claimed was the boundary. I had been driving that same driveway every day since I bought the place without a single issue, but suddenly she was acting like I'd committed land theft. From there, the pressure became constant. Her SUV started appearing at the edge of my driveway, parked just close enough to make backing out awkward and stressful. Not fully blocking me, just enough to send a message. Sometimes I'd catch HOA members standing near the fence line, phones out, snapping pictures like tourists at a crime scene. They never spoke to me. They just watched. One afternoon I came home and found fresh tire tracks cutting straight through my lawn, deep ones, deliberate. At the same time, one of my security cameras had been twisted sideways, no longer pointed where it was supposed to be. That's when it stopped feeling like harassment and started feeling like intimidation. Luckily for me, I'm an electrician who believes in redundancy. The backup camera caught everything, including Karen's SUV and license plate. Then came the police calls. The first time, an officer showed up saying there had been a report of harassment. I was confused until he explained the complaint came from Karen. I calmly pulled up the footage, showed him the property lines from my purchase documents, and explained the situation. He nodded, took notes, and left. A few days later, another officer arrived. This time the complaint was trespassing. Same routine, same evidence, same outcome. Each visit followed the same pattern. Karen would call. Officers would arrive, I would show proof, and they would leave. They stayed professional. But I could see the shift happening. Their questions became more pointed, not toward me, but toward her claims. I wasn't defensive. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't hiding anything. Karen, on the other hand, kept changing her story. That's when she escalated again. Within a single week, I received multiple notices from the county: electrical violations, junk vehicle storage, unsafe structures. One even mentioned general noncompliance. None of them cited specific code sections. None of them included photos. They were vague enough to be scary, but empty enough to collapse under inspection. It was obvious what was happening. Karen was flooding the system, hoping something would stick or that the sheer volume would break me. I'd be lying if I said it didn't get to me. There's something deeply unsettling about being targeted like that, especially on your own land. I started sleeping lighter. Every sound outside made me check the cameras. Every envelope in the mailbox made my stomach tighten, but panic never took over. I had already learned that lesson the hard way years ago. Emotion is what bullies feed on. Documentation is what starves them. So I did exactly what Karen didn't expect. I organized everything, every letter, every video clip, every timestamp. I labeled files, backed them up, and kept a written log of every interaction. Dates, times, who said what. I stopped responding emotionally and started responding methodically. When another officer showed up, I didn't argue. I handed over a folder. When a county inspector called, I invited them out and walked them through my permits. Each complaint unraveled faster than the last. And every time one did, Karen looked a little more frantic. She started driving by more often, slower, sometimes stopping outright. Once, I caught her pointing at my driveway while talking on the phone, pacing like she was rehearsing a script. It was clear she was losing control of the narrative, and that terrified her. The more proof I gathered, the clearer it became that this wasn't about property lines or standards. It was about power. Karen had decided that her HOA authority didn't stop at the edge of her subdivision, and the idea that someone could simply say no drove her insane. By that point, I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was watching her dig deeper. Every false report, every stage photo, every planted flag added another layer of evidence. She thought she was wearing me down. What she was actually doing was building my case for me, and I had a feeling things were about to get much worse before they got better. At that point, I stopped reacting and started digging. If Karen wanted to turn this into a paperwork war, I was more than ready. The very next morning, I went straight to the county clerk's office and asked for the full historical survey of my property. Not just the recent one from the sale, but everything going back as far as the records would allow: old plats, boundary adjustments, parcel splits, easements. I wanted it all. I sat there for hours flipping through maps that smelled like dust and ink, and by the time I left, I knew one thing for sure. Karen's claims weren't just wrong, they weren't even close. To remove any doubt, I hired an independent surveyor. Not someone recommended by the HOA, not someone local who might feel pressure. A firm from outside the area with no skin in the game. When they showed up, they brought GPS equipment accurate down to inches. I watched as they walked the perimeter, checked coordinates, and drove steel stakes into the ground. When they finished, the conclusion was undeniable. My driveway sat fully inside my parcel, with several feet of clearance beyond it. The so-called HOA buffer land Karen kept talking about didn't touch my property at all. While the survey work was happening, something else started to shift. People began talking, quietly at first, then more openly. A delivery driver stopped me one afternoon and asked if I was the guy dealing with the HOA lady. He told me she had tried to block him once, claiming he wasn't allowed to use certain streets. A rancher down the road laughed when I mentioned her name and said she'd filed complaints against anyone who didn't fit her idea of what the area should look like. Another neighbor admitted she avoided going outside when Karen was around because she didn't want to be questioned or photographed. It was unsettling, but also clarifying. Karen wasn't reacting to me personally. I was just the latest target. Then my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Linda Harper. She said she was the treasurer of the Silver Pines HOA and asked if she could talk. Her voice was tight, careful, like she was choosing every word on purpose. We spoke for nearly an hour. What she told me changed everything. Linda explained that Karen hadn't been authorized to contact me at all. In fact, Karen hadn't been part of the HOA board for months. There had been a closed-door meeting after multiple complaints about her behavior and handling of funds. According to Linda, Karen had been voted out unanimously for misconduct, financial misconduct, missing money, unauthorized fines. Decisions made without approval. Karen was no longer supposed to speak for the HOA in any capacity, and yet she was still doing it, still sending letters, still threatening enforcement, still calling the police and the county while presenting herself as the board leader. Linda sounded shaken, not just because of the situation, but because she realized the scope of the problem. Karen hadn't just crossed a line with me. She had crossed it with everyone. As Linda talked, pieces began snapping into place. The fake authority, the mailbox address, the confidence. Karen wasn't confused about the boundaries. She was manufacturing reality and daring people to challenge her. And most people, intimidated by official-sounding language and the fear of fines, never did. I thanked Linda and asked her to email me whatever documentation she could legally share. When the email came through, my stomach dropped. Meeting minutes, vote records, financial notes. Karen's removal was real, documented, signed. She had no authority at all. That was the moment my mindset shifted completely. Up until then, I had treated this like harassment. A neighbor with too much time and not enough sense. But this wasn't just bullying anymore. This was impersonation. This was fraud. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was pretending to be something she wasn't, collecting compliance through fear, and using public systems to back up her lies. I printed everything. The survey results, the historical maps, Linda's emails, the HOA records. I organized them into a clean, chronological packet. And for the first time since this started, I felt calm, not relieved. Focused. Karen was still driving by, still planting flags, still making calls. But now I understood why she was so aggressive. She wasn't protecting property values. She was protecting a collapsing illusion. Every time someone questioned her, that illusion cracked a little more. And I realized something else, too. She couldn't stop now, even if she wanted to. Admitting she was wrong would mean admitting she'd been lying for months, maybe longer. So instead of backing down, she was escalating. What Karen didn't understand was that escalation cuts both ways. And now, with the truth laid out in black and white, she wasn't just building pressure on me. She was building a case against herself. That was the moment I stopped reacting to Karen and started preparing for her. Up until then, I had been responding to whatever she threw at me. Another letter, another complaint, another drive-by. That ends your energy fast. So I changed gears. I treated the whole situation the same way I would treat a complex electrical job, methodically, step by step, with zero emotion. I started by organizing everything in strict chronological order. Every letter from the HOA went into a folder. Every police visit got logged with the officer's name, date, and report number. Every video clip from my cameras was saved twice, labeled, and backed up off-site. The survey documents went in their own section, along with the historical maps from the county clerk. I didn't just want proof. I wanted a clean, undeniable timeline that showed a pattern. At the same time, I contacted the county inspector directly and asked for an in-person review. When she came out, I walked her through everything. The permits, the property lines, the complaints. She didn't rush me. She took notes, checked codes, and inspected every structure Karen had reported. When she was done, she told me something that stuck with me. Every single complaint against me was unfounded. Not borderline, not questionable, completely baseless. She also told me something else. The volume and timing of the complaints showed clear abuse of the system. That mattered because it meant Karen wasn't just annoying. She was misusing public resources to intimidate someone. Karen must have sensed the ground shifting under her feet because her tone suddenly changed. Instead of angry letters and drive-bys, she showed up one afternoon smiling like none of it had ever happened. No clipboard, no measuring tape, just confidence and friendliness that felt forced. She told me she wanted to clear the air. She said there had been misunderstandings and that maybe we could work something out. Then she lowered her voice and made her real offer. Cash, a quiet deal, if I agreed to sell, or at least stop pushing back. She framed it like she was doing me a favor. I didn't argue. I didn't react. I just listened and asked her to repeat things when needed. The entire conversation was recorded crystal clear. When she realized I wasn't biting, the smile slipped. She warned me that things could get very complicated if I didn't cooperate. That was the threat, even if she didn't say it outright. As soon as she left, I sent a copy of the recording to a secure drive and wrote a summary while it was still fresh. No dramatizing, just facts. Meanwhile, Linda kept uncovering more. She shared HOA bank records showing money that shouldn't have been there and money that was missing. Dues collected after Karen had been removed. Fines issued without approval. Accounts accessed without authorization. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Karen wasn't just pretending to have authority over me. She had been abusing it inside her own community for a long time. Seeing it all together changed how I felt. The fear faded. The anger cooled. What replaced it was clarity. Karen's power depended entirely on people backing down, on confusion, on intimidation. Once everything was documented and exposed to daylight, her leverage disappeared, so I stopped responding to her entirely. No replies, no explanations. I let her keep talking, let her keep calling, let her keep making claims she couldn't support. Every move she made went into the file. That was the plan, not confrontation, not revenge. Exposure. The more pressure she felt, the sloppier she became. She contradicted herself in writing. She made claims that directly conflicted with official records. She escalated threats that were now clearly retaliation, and she did it all in ways that were easy to prove. What Karen didn't understand was that she had already lost the moment she tried to settle quietly. Innocent people don't offer cash to make problems disappear. They don't threaten complications when faced with facts. They don't keep pretending to represent an organization that removed them. By stepping back and letting her talk, I wasn't being passive. I was giving her space to show exactly who she was. And every word, every call, every letter made the picture clearer. I didn't need to trap her. She was walking straight into it on her own. All I had to do was stay calm, keep documenting, and wait. Karen panicked the moment she realized she was losing control. You could feel it in the way her tactics changed. The careful intimidation gave way to frantic overreach. She stopped pretending to be reasonable and started swinging at anything she thought might scare me into backing off. The reports increased overnight. More complaints to the county. More calls to law enforcement. Same vague accusations, same recycled language. But this time she went a step further. She started calling my clients. I found out when one of them called me, confused and clearly uncomfortable. He said a woman claiming to represent a homeowners association had contacted him, warning that my ongoing legal issues could affect inspections and permits tied to his project. That crossed a line, not just personally, but professionally. She wasn't just harassing me at home anymore. She was trying to damage my livelihood. I documented it and notified the county inspector immediately. She didn't sound surprised. In fact, her tone hardened. She told me to send everything I had and asked for the names of anyone Karen had contacted. That was the first time I heard the word impersonation come up in an official conversation. Karen didn't stop there. A few days later, a utility inspector arrived to verify a routine service upgrade on my property. Halfway through the inspection, Karen pulled up and marched straight toward him, demanding to know why he was on HOA land. She told him she had federal authority to halt unauthorized work. The inspector looked at her like she had just spoken another language. He asked for credentials. She had none. He called his supervisor on the spot. That backfired fast. Within days, the county flagged Karen for impersonation and interference. Her complaints were no longer treated as routine. Law enforcement started noting patterns. Officers who had previously shown up politely were now asking pointed questions. Not to me, but about her. When another call came in from Karen, dispatch logged it as a repeat false report. Meanwhile, word started spreading inside Silver Pines. HOA members who had once backed Karen quietly began distancing themselves. I noticed fewer cars parked near her house, fewer people standing beside her at the fence. The confidence she once carried so easily was slipping. She started showing up alone more often, talking louder, interrupting people mid-sentence. Acting like authority could be shouted back into existence. The tension reached its peak when Karen announced an emergency HOA meeting. She sent out emails declaring mandatory attendance and warning of serious consequences if residents didn't comply. The problem was simple. She had no legal authority to call that meeting. She hadn't for months. Still, she showed up anyway. The meeting was scheduled at the community clubhouse. When I arrived, I stayed in my truck across the lot, watching. Karen stood at the entrance with a stack of papers, trying to check people in like nothing had changed. Some residents walked past her without making eye contact. Others hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do. Then the county vehicles arrived. 2 of them. Karen froze when she saw them. The same inspector I had worked with stepped out, along with a county legal representative. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't cause a scene. They simply walked inside and asked for the current board members. Karen tried to speak over them. She claimed authority. She insisted the meeting was valid. The legal representative calmly asked her to step aside. She refused. That's when the inspector stated, clearly and for everyone to hear, that Karen was no longer authorized to represent the HOA and that her actions were under review. The room went silent. Board members exchanged looks. A few people whispered. Karen's face flushed red. She argued. She accused. She blamed me, the county, and even her own neighbors. But the documents were already on the table. Meeting minutes, vote records, financial discrepancies, everything Linda had provided. That was the moment the balance finally shifted in public. Residents started asking questions. Real ones. Where had their dues gone? Why were fines issued without approval? Why had police been called so many times? Karen tried to answer, but her words tangled. She contradicted herself. She grew defensive. The authority she relied on crumbled under scrutiny. By the end of the meeting, the county had made it clear. Karen was not to contact me again. She was not to file further complaints related to my property. Any future impersonation or interference would carry consequences. As people filed out, no one stood beside her. No one defended her. She gathered her papers with shaking hands, eyes darting around the room, realizing she was finally alone. I stayed in my truck until the lot cleared. When I drove home that night, the road felt quieter than it had in weeks. No parked SUV, no cameras pointed my way, no flags in the ground. Karen wasn't finished yet, I could tell. People like her rarely stop on their own. But for the first time since this started, the system wasn't tilted against me anymore. It was watching her. The final blow came a few days later, early in the afternoon, when I heard tires crunch to a stop near my driveway again. I already knew what it meant before my phone buzzed with a notification from one of my cameras. Karen was back, and this time she wasn't alone. She had called the cops one last time. According to her report, I was trespassing on HOA land again, damaging common property, and refusing to comply with lawful orders. It was the same script she'd been using for months, just delivered with more desperation. But this time, everything was different. When the patrol car arrived, the county inspector was already there. Linda Harper was standing beside me, with a folder tucked under her arm. The survey stakes were clearly visible along the boundary, bright, solid, and impossible to miss. The historical maps and GPS survey documents were laid out on the tailgate of my truck, organized and ready. The officer stepped out, calm and professional. He asked Karen to explain the situation. She launched into it immediately, talking fast, pointing at the ground, insisting the land belonged to the HOA and that I had been warned multiple times. Her voice grew louder with every sentence, like volume could replace evidence. The officer listened without interrupting. Then he turned to me. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I handed him the folder. He took his time. He looked at the deed, the survey, the county records. He walked the line himself, following the stakes from one end to the other. The county inspector explained how the boundary had been verified, how the complaints had been reviewed, and how Karen no longer had authority to represent the HOA in any capacity. The officer nodded slowly, absorbing it all. Then he turned back to Karen. She didn't stop. She doubled down. She argued that the HOA had implied control over the area. She claimed the vote removing her wasn't valid. She insisted the county was wrong. She even accused Linda of forging documents. Her voice climbed higher, sharper, drawing attention from nearby neighbors who had started drifting closer. That's when the officer raised his hand and stopped her mid-sentence. He told her, very plainly, that she had just filed a false report. He explained that calling law enforcement with claims she knew were untrue was a serious offense. Then he added something that visibly rattled her. Impersonating an HOA officer and misrepresenting authority carried real legal consequences, especially when it involved repeated reports and interference. Karen went quiet. For the first time since I'd met her, she had nothing to say. The officer issued the citation right there on the side of the road. No drama, no yelling, just paperwork. The county inspector followed up by formally instructing Karen to cease all contact related to my property. Linda stepped forward and informed her, in front of witnesses, that the HOA board was moving to permanently bar her from any leadership role and that a full audit was already underway. Karen stood there, clutching her phone, eyes darting back and forth as everything she'd built collapsed in real time. She tried to interrupt once more, but the officer shut that down immediately. There was no argument left to have. The financial records were handed over. The county confirmed they would be referred for further investigation. Karen wasn't arrested that day, but she didn't need to be. The weight of what was coming settled over her face as clearly as the afternoon sun. She watched as the officer finished his notes. She watched as the county inspector packed up. She watched as Linda walked away without looking back. All the confidence, all the authority, gone. Neighbors lingered nearby, whispering. A few shook their heads. One man crossed his arms and stared at her, clearly remembering past run-ins. No one defended her. No one stepped in. She had spent months isolating people, intimidating them, and relying on fear to keep control. Now, with the truth exposed, she was standing alone on the edge of the road she claimed she owned. When the patrol car pulled away, the silence was heavy. Karen got back into her SUV without another word. She didn't slam the door. She didn't shout. She just sat there for a moment, staring straight ahead, before driving off slowly. I stood there a few seconds longer, letting it sink in. The cameras were still rolling. The stakes were still in the ground. The proof was still laid out exactly where it belonged. For months, Karen had tried to paint me as the problem, the troublemaker, the rule breaker. In the end, she didn't lose because I yelled louder or played dirtier. She lost because everything she did was documented, and everything I owned was provable. As I gathered the folders and closed the tailgate, I felt something I hadn't felt since this whole thing started. Relief. Not the loud, triumphant kind. The quiet kind. The kind that settles into your chest when you know finally that the fight is over and that the truth won. After that day, everything unraveled faster than I expected. Once the citation was issued and the county formally stepped in, the illusion Karen had built collapsed almost overnight. The HOA board didn't waste time trying to protect her. In fact, it felt like they were relieved to finally have a reason to cut ties publicly. Within a week, residents were notified that a full audit of the HOA's finances was underway. No vague language, no excuses, just a blunt acknowledgement that things had gone very wrong. People started asking questions. Real questions. Where had their dues gone? Why were fines issued without votes? Why were records incomplete? Linda later told me the audit uncovered unauthorized collections, unexplained withdrawals, and payments that never should have existed. Once the numbers were laid out, there was no spinning it. Karen hadn't just bent rules. She had treated the HOA like her personal tool for years. The shift inside the neighborhood was immediate. Residents who had once kept their heads down suddenly found their voices. Meetings were packed. Demands for transparency filled inboxes. New board elections were scheduled, and strict financial controls were put in place. Karen's name went from being spoken carefully to being spoken openly, usually followed by a shake of the head. As for Karen herself, she disappeared for a while. No drive-bys. No parked SUV near my driveway. No more phones pointed in my direction. When her name came up, it was always secondhand. Legal fees were piling up. Attorneys weren't cheap. The county investigation didn't move fast, but it moved steadily, and that alone was enough to drain her resources. A few months later, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. I didn't feel any satisfaction seeing it, just a quiet sense of finality. The house sold quickly, well below what she had claimed it was worth. From what I heard, most of the proceeds went straight to covering legal costs and outstanding obligations tied to the HOA mess she left behind. She moved out without fanfare, no goodbye, no explanation, just gone. And with her departure, the harassment stopped completely. The false complaints ended. The police stopped coming. The county stopped calling. My phone went quiet. The tension that had followed me everywhere finally lifted. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without checking cameras or listening for tires on gravel. My driveway stayed exactly where it had always been, open, unchallenged, mine. I didn't celebrate. I didn't throw a party. I just went back to living my life, fixing up the house, working my jobs, enjoying the quiet that had drawn me to this place in the first place. The only thing I added was a small sign near the boundary line. Nothing dramatic, no threats, just plain black lettering on white metal. Private property. Survey on file. I placed it right next to one of the survey stakes, visible but unobtrusive. No one questioned it. Delivery drivers nodded when they saw it. Neighbors glanced at it and moved on. HOA members didn't stop or take photos anymore. The sign didn't start arguments. It ended them before they could begin. It wasn't there to intimidate anyone. It was there to make one thing clear, without saying another word. This land is owned. This land is documented. And this conversation is over. What surprised me most was how quickly peace returned once the noise stopped. I hadn't realized how much energy I'd been spending just bracing myself every day. Once that was gone, everything felt lighter. Even the house looked different, like it could finally breathe. Occasionally, someone would ask me about what happened. A neighbor, a delivery driver, someone who had heard bits and pieces. I'd tell them the truth calmly and without embellishment. Most of them reacted the same way. A slow nod, a quiet, "That makes sense." Because it did. Karen didn't lose because I outplayed her or embarrassed her. She lost because her entire strategy depended on people being afraid to challenge her. Once the facts were laid out, once the records were checked, once authority showed up in its real form instead of her imitation, there was nothing left for her to stand on. I never wanted a fight. I just wanted to live on my own land in peace. In the end, that's exactly what I got. And every time I drive past that small sign at the edge of my property, I'm reminded of something simple but powerful. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be documented. Looking back now, the wildest part of all this wasn't the police lights in my driveway or the constant threats. It was how confidently Karen believed she could take something that didn't belong to her just by saying it loudly enough. She genuinely thought authority was something you could perform into existence. Say it with enough confidence, repeat it often enough, and people would eventually give in. What this experience taught me is simple, but powerful. Know exactly what you own. Keep your records clean. Document everything, and never confuse noise with truth. The loudest person in the room is rarely the one who's right. They're usually the one trying to hide the weakest position. These days, my property is quiet again. No orange flags, no strangers taking photos, no cameras pointed at my house from across the fence. Just the sound of gravel under my tires when I pull in after work, and the kind of silence you can only appreciate after it's been taken away for a while. That peace is the whole reason I bought this place in the first place. Every now and then, when I drive down my driveway, I think back to that morning when everything started. The confusion, the anger, the feeling of being accused on my own land, and I smile a little, not out of spite, but out of relief. Because in the end, I didn't win by yelling louder, threatening back, or trying to humiliate anyone. I won by staying calm, staying patient, and letting the truth do what it always does when it's backed by proof. It turns out the strongest response isn't revenge at all. It's clarity. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?